What's going on, Summoners? Welcome back to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. I'm Kangas, and today I'm going over the best team compositions for Wild Rift. When taking into consideration team comps, there's loads of factors that need to be considered, like synergy during teamfights, ability to create windows of opportunity, and just overall capability to perform their respective roles, whatever that role may be. But before we begin, we got our question of the day. What's your favorite video format for the channel? Maybe enjoy the tier list, or the counter the meta videos, or even our silly guess the rank videos. Personally speaking, I love creating those guessing the rank ones with Tia, but let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's get into the video. When you're queuing up for ranked and you're last in the pick order, think to yourself, what does my team need for success? A lot of times, players will be very selfish in picking their champions, often locking in super squishy ranged carries rather than the needed tanks. Reason for this being tanks are generally just less fun to play than the hyper carries. But here are the basic requirements necessary for any good team composition. At least one melee champion, some semblance of crowd control, at least one decent engage, and area of effect damage. During champion select, if your team is missing any of these aspects, try and pick a champion that will fill in the weaknesses, as long as you know how to play that champ. Now, Engage and Melee are both pretty self-explanatory as to why you need them in any given team composition. Melee champions tend to be tankier and therefore offer decent frontline capabilities, while Engage is super important to allow aggressive options to capitalize on. If your team is not engaging on the enemy, you're probably being engaged on. In such a fast-paced, snowball-reliant game like Wild Rift, not having an engage is a massive detriment, so try to just make sure that you have at least one champion on your team who can start a fight. Crowd control is also essential to locking down key targets on the enemy team, such as Katarina and Fiora, in order to help mitigate the enemy team's plays. You need crowd control to create the best offense and defensive plays. Playing against a champion like Katarina without CC is going to be really rough, since they can just dash around and deal all the damage that they want, while attempting to make aggressive plays without CC becomes much more unnecessarily mechanically demanding. So make sure you got some lockdown potential in every team composition to help facilitate the game flow, increasing your team fighting potential while diminishing the enemies. Now, for examples of champions that perform their respective jobs exceptionally, be sure to check out our patch 2.3 high elo tier list. Chances are the champions at the top of their roles are exceptionally strong in most team compositions, providing great utility and synergizing well with other champs in the current meta. Now, the least obvious one is, why is area of effect damage on the list essential as a variable to have a strong team composition? Area of effect damage is best in teamfights to affect as many enemy champions at once, thereby increasing the overall utility of abilities as a whole. Take, for example, Jinx with Runaan's Hurricane versus Vayne with Blade of the Ruin King in a 5v5 teamfight scenario. Jinx can auto-attack clumped-up champions all at once, dealing a massive amount of damage across the board with a single auto, while Vayne's single auto on a single champion deals substantially less damage as a whole. Now, this is an extreme example, but it's pretty clear which champion provides more utility as a whole in this scenario. Single target abilities are great for the laning phase, but having the option to hit multiple targets at once is a necessary aspect in every given team composition. If a champion has the ability to use their skills on multiple targets at once, as a general rule of thumb, it drastically increases the efficiency at which they can perform their given role. And this doesn't just apply to damage. Take Seraphine's ultimate as another example. If it only hit a single champion, it'd be kinda lackluster. But since it extends further the more units it passes through, the area of effect capability of Encore is massive, allowing her to perform the role of providing crowd control more effectively. In addition, her heal casts in a circle around her, granting barriers and heals to multiple allies at once. This gives her more utility as a champion than Soraka will, since Soraka needs to point her heal Astral Infusion to a specific champion rather than the entire team. Now let's take Katarina as another example. When she spins, either through catching her blades or through her ultimate Death Lotus, she deals damage all around her. Now, I'm sure that we've all seen this happen, but when she goes into the middle of the enemy team, by having the option to hit all of the enemies around her, the Sinister Dagger's DPS is absolutely absurd. And that's all thanks to her area of effects damage that she's able to perform the role of a burst mage so effectively. So now if a champion has all of the mentioned traits, in essence crowd control, area of effect damage, engage, and frontline capabilities, chances are that champion will fit well into almost every team comp. So from then on, it's more up to the nuanced picks and playstyles of each champion or player to further synergize and create optimal team plays, beginning with what synergy you want to have in a team fight. But before we dive into that, I want to remind everyone that if you want to join in on the discussion of team compositions, make sure to check out our ProGuides Wild Rift Discord in the link in the description below. We always have open conversations about the game, and we're positive that you'll find other players to socialize with and just discuss the game more with. something that you'll find is very important when you're queuing up with more than one member. So that leads us to our next section, discussing specific team compositions to help illustrate some of our key points. Now, our first example is the infamous Wombo Combo team composition that relies on area of effect knockups to keep the enemy up in the air, rendering them essentially unable to react. Champions that synergize perfectly with this goal in mind would be Wukong jungle, Malphite Baron lane, Yasuo mid, Lulu support, and Kai'Sa AD carry. All of these champions can wombo their ultimates together. Wukong or Malphite throwing out the initial engage, with Lulu and Yasuo extending that engage for a longer duration. Kai'Sa can then utilize her ultimate to immediately follow up any locked down targets, providing the more stable DPS throughout the fight. Now, in this specific scenario, there are already 3 melee frontline champions in the team comp, all of whom rely on hard engages to deal their damage. Since there's already so much engage, Lulu might synergize even better into the team composition than an Alistar would, who is one of the go-to champions for knockups. The reason for this is that while yes, Alistar is a fantastic champion for heavy engages, at this point, the team already has enough frontline to run straight at the enemy team. Since Lulu provides a more versatile support, she's arguably even better in this specific scenario. Her abilities will help maximize overall damage by granting the AD carry bonus stats. Malphite and Wukong fall off after the initial burst damage, lacking the consistent output to carry out the team fight thereafter. So if the initial knockout Wombo combo doesn't work out, or isn't enough to absolutely destroy the team fight, the Lulu Kai'Sa combo will help fill in that gap. Kai'Sa is one of the greatest consistent damage carries in the game, utilizing her passive stacks to deal fantastic DPS. Lulu helps the hyper carry deal even more damage per hit while also increasing the attack speed at the same time. Essentially, the Kai'Sa and Lulu picks will help fill in the tiny gap of weakness in the team composition. But what if these two champions were replaced with, for example, Miss Fortune and Alistar? Now, Alistar and Miss Fortune wouldn't necessarily be terrible picks in this team comp. In fact, they're actually great picks, but these two picks definitely add more onto the pre-existing Wombo combo all-in engage rather than adding in more versatility. Alistar's Headbutt Pulverize combo is sure to render the enemy unable to move for like 10 seconds when paired with everything else, and Miss Fortune's ultimate thereafter is sure to decimate clumped up enemies. The issue with this is that you're essentially placing all of your chips on a single bet, creating an all-or-nothing circumstance. If that bet doesn't work out, maybe because the enemy team is prepared for you, or more likely your team lacks the proper coordination to pull off proper combos, you end up with no real strengths. If the team had a Kai'Sa though, she can still solo carry the game with Lulu, but Miss Fortune and Alistar are both very team-reliant, relying more heavily on team coordination and burst damage. Granted, Alistar, Miss Fortune, Wukong, Malphite, and Yasuo make for a team that is without a doubt stronger than the vast majority of the team comps that you'll find in an average solo queue game. But the point of this small example is more for analyzing the difference between changing just a couple of members of the team comp rather than telling you exactly what you should do. Now, our second example is something that you're honestly more likely to see in ranked, since not everyone will be on the same wavelength in regards to synergizing picks. Ezreal AD carry, Teemo in the Baron lane, Annie mid, Graves jungle, and Soraka support. Honestly, this team comp is turbo garbage, especially when compared to the first example. Now, this may seem obvious to most players, but for those who don't understand why this team composition sucks, let's go over what exactly it lacks. First of all of these picks are ranged. Having 2, maybe even 3 ranged champions is not that big of a deal, but if the entire composition is ranged, there's nobody to realistically engage and frontline the team fights. This means that there are little to no chances of creating advantageous opportunities and therefore decrease the overall chances of victory. The only champion with a semblance of a strong engage here is Annie, using her tippers with a stun. But the issue is, none of the champions have an ability to synergize with Annie's engage after. Yeah, a couple of skill shots from Graves and Ezreal might deal some additional damage, but without crowd control to stack on top of engage alongside Annie's, unless she lands the perfect ultimate, the team composition severely lacks the crowd control and AoE damage needed to succeed. In addition, all these champions want to stand really far back and scale into the game, but if they all want to perform this function, then none of them can realistically perform it at its best, since all the players will be fighting amongst each other to secure the safest position. Like, imagine how a team fight with this specific composition would go. The enemy would engage, and Soraka would continuously fall back. She's definitely the most vulnerable and therefore wants to stand behind her team. But if she runs away, Ezreal arcane shifts backwards too, while Graves dashes to fall back as well. None of them want the enemy's focus, leaving Soraka as the sitting duck against the enemy's attacks. Meanwhile, Teemo's T-posing somewhere in a bush waiting for an opportunity to cheese the enemy. Chances are, once the enemy focuses the Soraka, she'll either lose too much health to heal anybody on her team, or more realistically die immediately to the enemy's engage.
And the rest of the team has literally no reason to group since none of their abilities synergize well with each other, leaving the players better off treating the game as a solo player experience rather than a team game. And I'm pretty positive that we have all had games where this has occurred. Now, a perfect single champion switch to help improve the specific team composition significantly would just be replacing Soraka with Braum. Doing so opens up loads of opportunities to synergize, since he can not only protect the carries and dash alongside Ezreal and Graves rather than just being left alone to die, but he can also create opportunities to stun with concussive blows, synergizing with the auto attack reliant carries, and additionally he can also follow up on Annie's engage with his own ultimate. Now, this is still far from the best team composition. That singular change creates a vast difference in synergy. Every team composition can be corrected in a similar manner, so try to keep an eye on how to improve your respective team compositions, even if your allies are unwilling to do so. Players that group and work with their team are much more likely to create the windows of opportunity to win a game, while team compositions that don't incentivize grouping often result in lackluster coordination.
Look, we all know that the game can be frustrating to coordinate with your team, and sometimes that synergy and skills to properly execute team plays are simply not there. But please do not use this as an excuse to give up. Try not to stress too much when you can't create your ideal team comp and champ select, because the game can still be winnable regardless. But hey, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, remember to leave a like and sub to the channel for everything Wild Rift in the future. That's going to be for today, so best of luck on the Rift, stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.